In the tranquil atmosphere of the royal court, Janimjaya, a young and inquisitive prince, sat at the feet of his revered guru Vaisampayana. With reverence, he began to ask about the lives of his illustrious grandsires, the Pandavas who had once been the rulers of the kingdom. Tell me, Vaisampayana, Janimjaya said with a curious tone, how did my grandsires, the high-souled Pandavas, conduct themselves towards King Dhritarashtra after they had regained their kingdom? How did that king behave who had lost everything? His counselors, sons, and affluent? Vaisampayana, with a gentle smile, began to weave a tale of compassion and forgiveness. After regaining their kingdom, he said, the Pandavas, led by the wise king Yudhishthira, placed Dhritarashtra at their head. They will often visit him, worship his feet, and seek his counsel in all matters. As Vaisampayana spoke, the scene unfolded like a painting. The royal court was filled with the sound of laughter and conversation as the Pandavas would sit beside Dhritarashtra, listening to his words of wisdom. Vidur, Sanjaya, and Yuyotsa, the sons of Dhritarashtra's Vaisya wife, waited upon him with devotion. King Yudhishthira, known for his just nature, will often present Dhritarashtra with costly gifts, beds, robes, ornaments, and food. Kunti, Draupadi, Suvagra, and the other ladies of the Pandavas treated Gandhara and Dhritarashtra as their own father-in-law and mother-in-law. As Vaisampayana's tale continued, it became clear that the Pandavas had made a conscious effort to ease Dhritarashtra's pain. They knew that he was still reeling from the loss of his sons and counselors. To make him feel comfortable, Yudhishthira will often say to his brothers, we must show particular obedience to our grandfather. However, there was one exception, Bhima, who still harbored resentment towards Dhritarashtra for his role in the match at Dis that had led to their exile. Though he tried to put aside his feelings, the memories of those fateful days lingered deep within him. As Vaisampayana finished speaking, Janimjaya listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. He had heard stories of his grandsires' bravery and wisdom, but this tale of compassion and forgiveness revealed a new side to their character, one that was guided by the principles of Dharma and Ahimsa. In the kingdom of Hastinapura, where the sun rose over the rolling hills and the Ganges river flowed gently, King Dhritarashtra, the ruler of the Kuru dynasty, sat upon his throne. His eyes, though clouded by the sorrow of losing his sons and grandsons in battle, still shone with a deep affection for his nephew Yudhishthira. The eldest son of Pandu was Vaisampayana. The wise sage began to recount the tale. He spoke of how Yudhishthira had always revered his uncle, treating him with the utmost respect and deference. The royal soil of Amika, Vaisampayana said, passed its time happily, as before, waited upon and honored by the rishis. The Pandavas, led by Yudhishthira, made offerings to the Brahmanas, following the ancient traditions of their ancestors. In the court of Hastinapura, King Dhritarashtra was deeply moved by his nephew's devotion. He saw in Yudhishthira a reflection of himself, a man who had lost so much but still held on to his duty and his honor. The old king began to show greater favor towards his nephew, bestowing upon him the wealth and power that he once reserved for his own sons. As the days passed, Yudhishthira's influence grew, and with it the affection of Gandhara, Dhritarashtra's wife, who had long been consumed by grief. She began to see in the Pandavas a new family, one that would bring her joy and comfort her. Sorrow slowly gave way to love as she watched Yudhishthira and his brothers care for their uncle with kindness and devotion. King Dhritarashtra, too, found solace in the presence of his nephew. Rising every morning before dawn, he would purify himself through rituals and prayers, seeking blessings for the Pandavas. He would then bless them, wishing them victory in battle and long life. The old king's happiness was now derived from the sons of Pandu, who had brought light into his darkened world. Yudhishthira, aware of his uncle's suffering, made sure to show him kindness and respect at all times. He would often visit Dhritarashtra, listening to his counsel and following his orders without hesitation. The old king was grateful for this devotion, which reminded him of the good times he had with his own sons. But not everyone in Hastinapura shared the same affection for the Pandavas. Bhima, Yudhishthira's brother, still harbored a deep-seated anger towards Dhritarashtra, who had wronged him so grievously in the past. Though he outwardly showed respect to his uncle, his heart remained heavy with resentment. As Vaisampayana finished, in the Kuru kingdom a sense of unease had begun to settle over King Dhritarashtra and his family. The once cordial relationship between him and his nephew Yudhishthira was slowly fraying. Meanwhile, Bhima, the powerful and hot-headed Pandava brother, had been secretly causing trouble for the king. He would often disobey the king's commands through deceitful servants, and his actions were a constant source of frustration for Dhritarashtra. One day in front of the king, and Gandhari let out a burst of anger and resentment towards his family. "I am the one who has sent your sons to their deaths," he declared, slapping his arms in a gesture of triumph. "These iron clubs have crushed them all." The king was taken aback by Vima's words, and Gandhari tried to calm him down. But Dhritarashtra couldn't shake off the feeling of despair that had been growing inside him as the years passed. Dhritarashtra became increasingly consumed by grief. He would often eat little food, just enough to quench his thirst, and spend his days lying on the ground reciting prayers in a state of silent meditation. His wife Gandhari shared his vow, observing similar penances and living in quiet devotion. And day Dhritarashtra decided he had had enough of ruling from afar. He called upon Yudhishthira to come before him and share his deep regret for having failed as a king. "I have brought about the downfall of our family through my own fault. He confessed I should have listened to the wise words of Vasudeva, Vidura, Bhishma, and Kripa, who all warned me against my wicked son Duryodhana." Dhritarashtra's eyes filled with tears as he spoke of his regret for not having bestowed prosperity on the Pandavas. He looked at Yudhishthira and said, "You are the rightful king, but I have failed you. I have brought shame upon our family." And then, in a surprising turn of events, Dhritarashtra asked Yudhishthira to grant him permission to retire from the kingdom. "I want to live in the woods," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I will wear rags and bark, and I will live on air alone or abstain from all food. Gandhari will join me, and we will practice severe austerities together." Yudhishthira was taken aback by his uncle's request, but he knew that the old king had been suffering for many years. Moved by Dhritarashtra's words, Yudhishthira agreed to let him go. "I am not worthy of ruling," he said. "You are our father, our mother, and our superior. I will give up my." In the midst of a summer gathering, Vesa, the revered sage, stood before King Yudhishthira, his words dripping with compassion. "O my yarned one," he began, "do as Dhritarashtra. Your father hath asked without hesitation. His grief is palpable, and I fear for his well-being if he does not find solace soon." Vesa's eyes seemed to hold a deep understanding of the old king's turmoil as he spoke. Gandhari, the queen, stood steadfast, her face etched with sorrow, yet her voice steady as she sang her lament. Vesa's words were laced with empathy for the entire family, and his tone was one of gentle persuasion. "Let the old king have your permission," he urged Yudhishthira. "Let him not pass away in ignominy within these palace walls." Yudhishthira listened intently to Vesa's words, his expression a testament to his respect for the sage. He bowed his head in reverence, acknowledging Vesa as his preceptor and refuge, just as he was the king of their kingdom. With humility, Yudhishthira spoke, "The holy self is held by us in great reverence, O Vesa, though alone art our preceptor, our king, and our father." Vesa's countenance softened at the young king's words, his eyes shining with a deep affection for the prince he had guided. He nodded his head in agreement. "It is even so, almighty armed one. This king has reached old age, and it is time for him to follow the path of all royal sages." Vesa's voice carried the weight of tradition and wisdom as the sage continued memories of King and Yudhishthira's father flooded his mind. "Your royal sire, O king of kings," he said with a hint of nostalgia, "reverence this old king as a disciple reverences his preceptor." Vesa's eyes seemed to wander through the ages, recalling the great sacrifices and gifts that King Anu had made in honor of Dhritarashtra. Yudhishthira listened attentively, his understanding growing with each passing moment. He knew that his father had always held Dhritarashtra in high esteem, and now it was time for him to follow suit. With a quiet resolve, Yudhishthira spoke, so be it. His words were a testament to his respect for tradition and his willingness to set aside personal feelings for the greater good. As Vesa departed for the woods, Yudhishthira turned to his father with a newfound sense of understanding. He knelt before Dhritarashtra, his head bent in humility. "What the holy Vesa has said, what is the own purpose, I shall accomplish with speed." The young king's words, as the sun began to sound, hastened at Kura. King Dhritarashtra, a man of great energy and intelligence, slowly made his way back to his palace. He was accompanied by his wife Gandhari, who was well versed in every duty. They were followed by Vidur, a wise and learned counselor, and Sanjaya, The king's charioteer as well as Kripa, a skilled archer. As they entered the palace, Dhritarashtra went through the morning rites, offering prayers to the gods and performing the sacred rituals. He was then joined by his daughters-in-law who had come to pay their respects to him. They offered various gifts and took some food together. After the meal, the Pandavas, led by Yudhishthira, approached the old king and sat around him. Dhritarashtra's son, addressing Yudhishthira with affection, said, "My dear son, you must always act wisely in matters of state as the ruler of a kingdom with 8 limbs. You must prioritize righteousness and justice above all else." Dhritarashtra continued to advise his son, saying that he should honor those who were old in learning and listen to their counsel. He emphasized the importance of consulting with wise men before taking action and warned against revealing confidential matters to others. As they sat together, Dhritarashtra outlined a comprehensive plan for ruling the kingdom. He advised Yudhishthira to surround himself with loyal and honest ministers, to collect information through trusted spies, and to protect his person and family at all costs. The king also emphasized the need to maintain order in the city and provinces, ensuring that justice was upheld and punishments were meted out fairly. He warned against corruption and bribery and advised Yudhishthira to be mindful of his own weaknesses as well as those of his enemies. As the evening wore on, Dhritarashtra's thoughts turned to the management of his kingdom. He advised Yudhishthira to divide his time wisely, allocating specific hours for different tasks. In the morning, he should attend to administrative matters and inspect the treasury. Afternoon would be devoted to reviewing military forces, and engaging in sport. Evenings would be reserved for envoys and spies, while late at night would be spent planning for the next day. As the old king finished speaking, Yudhishthira listened intently, his eyes fixed on his father's wise face. He knew that he had a great deal to learn from Dhritarashtra and was grateful for the guidance and counsel offered by his father. With renewed determination, Yudhishthira vowed to rule his kingdom with wisdom and justice, following in the footsteps of his illustrious ancestors. As the night drew to a close, Dhritarashtra smiled, satisfied that he had imparted his knowledge and experience to his son. In the midst of a vast kingdom, Dhritarashtra, the wise and venerable king, sat in contemplation, offering words of wisdom to his son. Yudhishthira, always understand the mandalas that belong to you, your foes neutrals, and those who are impartial, he said, his voice filled with gravity. These mandalas are like the threads of a tapestry intricately woven together. You must distinguish between the mandalas of all these enemies and those who remain neutral. As Dhritarashtra spoke, Yudhishthira listened intently, his mind absorbing every word. He knew that a king's power lay not only in his armies and wealth, but also in his understanding of the delicate balance of forces within his kingdom. The ministers of state, the people of the provinces, the garrisons of forts, and the forces are like the fingers of a hand. Dhritarashtra continued, if one finger is injured, the entire hand suffers. You must protect these vital parts of your kingdom from harm. Dhritarashtra went on to explain that there were 12 principal concerns for kings, which he referred to as mandalas. These included maintaining peace and war, marching and halting, sowing dissensions and conciliation. He also spoke of the 6-fold incidents: growth, diminution, stability, and the attributes of each, which depended on these mandalas. When your side is strong and your enemies weak, then it is time to wage war, he said. But when you are weak and your enemy strong, seek peace. Yudhishthira listened. He realized that being a king was not just about wielding power, but also about understanding the complex web of relationships within his kingdom. Dhritarashtra's words were like a river flowing through the heart of the kingdom, nourishing its people and guiding them towards prosperity. Dhritarashtra continued to offer his son advice on how to govern wisely. When collecting wealth, give gold with base metal, he said. When giving land, choose areas that produce little crops. When handing over men, give those who are weak. He also spoke of the importance of making treaties and taking hostages from defeated kings. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the kingdom, Dhritarashtra's words came to an end. Yudhishthira rose from his seat, his eyes shining with understanding. He knew that he had been entrusted with a great responsibility to protect his kingdom and its people, and to guide them towards peace and prosperity. In the days that followed, Yudhishthira carried Dhritarashtra's words in his heart, using them as a guiding light for his own rule. He understood that being a king was not just about power, but also about compassion, wisdom, and justice. And as he walked through the kingdom, in the court of Hastinapur, Dhritarashtra, the king of the Kuras, sat in contemplation, seeking guidance from his nephew Yudhishthira on the art of war and governance. Reflect properly on war and peace, he said, for each has its own two kinds with various means and circumstances. He cautioned Yudhishthira to consider his own strength and weakness, as well as that of his enemy before embarking on a campaign. Dhritarashtra advised his nephew to march against an enemy who was weak in numbers or moral, but not against one who was strong and united. When everything is favorable, he said, the foe may be beaten. However, the victor should then retire and cause dissensions among the enemies, always afflicting them with calamities. And in inspiring terror in their hearts, the king also spoke of the importance of gathering strength. Through audiences, wealth, and military might, he mentioned that the power of spies was equal to that of a standing army. On many occasions, calamity, he said, should be regarded as of many forms. He warned Yudhishthira to always count these calamities, distinguishing their forms, and strive to meet them with conciliation and other well-known means. Yudhishthira listened intently to his uncle's words, promising to follow his instructions. The old king then wished to obtain the young king's permission to retire to the forest, as he had grown weary of ruling. He entered the apartments of Gandhari, his wife, who asked him when he would leave for the woods. Dhritarashtra replied that he had received Vesa's permission and was waiting for Yudhishthira's consent. He also expressed a desire to give away wealth capable of following the status of prince in respect of all those sons of his who were addicted to calamitous. This he sent for Yudhishthira, who brought all the necessary articles. Many Brahmanas and Kshatriyas gathered at Dhritarashtra's mansion, eager to receive gifts from the old king. Beholding them assembled together, Dhritarashtra spoke words of gratitude and appreciation, saying that he had lived well with his subjects for many years, and now wished to retire into the woods along with Gandhari as his companion. He asked for their permission, assuring them that his goodwill towards them would remain unchanged. He confessed that he was worn out by age, childless, and emaciated by fasts, but had enjoyed great happiness under Yudhishthira's rule. The assembly of Brahmanas and Kshatriyas granted him their permission, and Dhritarashtra felt a sense of relief wash over him as he prepared to leave for the forest with his wife and companions. As the old king departed, he was filled with a sense of gratitude towards. The sun had set over Hastinapur, casting a warm orange glow over the city. As Dhritarashtra stood before his people, his voice trembled slightly as he began to speak, his words carrying on the gentle breezes. Antonu, your king ruled this earth with wisdom and justice, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd, and Vikatravariya, protected by Bhishma's mighty arm, followed in his footsteps. I am sure you all remember how Pandu, my brother, was dear to me as well as to you. He too ruled with kindness and compassion. Dhritarashtra paused, his gaze drifting towards the ground as he continued, I have also served this kingdom, doing my duty to the best of my abilities. Whether I have succeeded or failed, it is for you to judge, but I pray that you will forgive me, for I have acted without malice. See, as he spoke, Gandhari stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the ground. As well, her presence was a reminder of all. They had lost their children, their youth, and their vitality. Dhritarashtra's voice cracked with emotion as he continued, Duryodhana, my son, enjoyed this kingdom without a care in the world, foolish and misguided. Though he never harmed you directly, but through his own pride and my own impulsiveness. A great tragedy befell us. All the old king's eyes rose to meet those of his people, filled with a deep longing. I beg of you, forget this sorrow. Remember the good times we had together, the joy and prosperity that once filled our kingdom. Consider my age and frailty, Gandhari's grief-stricken heart, and the loss we have both endured. He took a step forward, his hands clasped together in supplication. I make over to you Yudhishthira, the son of Kunti, as your new king. He is strong, wise, and just, with 4 brothers who will stand by him through thick and thin. They are the guardians of our kingdom's future. As Dhritarashtra finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over the crowd. The people looked at one another, their faces etched with sorrow and compassion. Some wiped away tears, while others simply stood still, lost in thought. The old king bowed his head, his hands still clasped together, as he waited for some sign of forgiveness from those he had served for so long. But the crowd remained silent, their eyes fixed on one another rather than on Dhritarashtra's pleading form.
The old king Dhritarashtra stood before his people, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had made the difficult decision to retire to the forest, and now he sought their permission. The citizens of Kuruhinla were taken aback by this news, and they wept as if a dear son was leaving them, forever their grief-stricken faces covered with their hands and upper garments. They wept for a while, unable to speak. But gradually they regained their composure, and the learned Brahmana Samba was chosen to respond on their behalf with great respect and deference. He spoke to the king, "O monarch, we have heard your words, and we grant you our permission to retire to the forest. You are a well-wisher of ours, as we are thine. We have lived under your rule like fathers or brothers. Samba, continue. Your son, Duryodhana, never did us any wrong. He protected and ruled us with kindness, just like his predecessors, King Santanu and Chitrangada. Your father, too, was a great king protected by the prowess of Bhishma, and your son, Yudhishthira, who is conversant with every duty, has also been a righteous ruler, performing sacrifices with gifts in profusion." The Brahmana's words were filled with praise for the Pandavas and their conduct. "Your son, Yudhishthira, follows the path of the royal sages of old belonging to your race. He is a master of great intelligence and wisdom, and his rule has brought us great happiness. We have lived under his protection, like children, under the care of a father." Sima then addressed the king's concerns about Duryodhana's role in the carnage that had occurred. "The destruction that has overtaken our people was not caused by your son or you, O monarch. It was brought about by destiny, which is beyond human control. 8 and 10 echelons of troops were brought together, but they were destroyed by the greatest warriors of Kuru's race, including Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and others. The Brahmana then absolved Yudhishthira of any blame for the carnage. The son was not the cause of that destruction, nor were you or your servants or Karna or Suvala's son. The destruction of those high-souled kings was brought about by destiny. We therefore absolve the righteous-souled son from all guilt." Samba concluded his speech with words of praise for Yudhishthira and the Pandavas. "The son of Pandu is a mighty warrior devoted to the duties of righteousness. He protects and cherishes us like a father protecting his children. His ministers are learned and wise, and he is compassionate even towards his foes. We will always be obedient to him in."
As the night wore off, Dhritarashtra, the aged king of Hastinapura, dispatched his trusted advisor Vidura to Yudhishthira's mansion. Vidura, a man of great energy and intelligence, arrived at the mansion and conveyed the king's message to Yudhishthira. The king, who had undergone the preliminary rites for retiring into the woods, requested some wealth from Yudhishthira to perform the Sraddha rituals for his slain kinsman and well-wishers. Yudhishthira, along with Arjuna, was overjoyed at Vidura's words and applauded them highly. However, Bhima, who had a deep-seated anger towards their cousins, Duryodhana, and his brothers, did not accept the news in good spirits. He recalled the pain and suffering they had endured during their 12-year exile, and how Dhritarashtra's affection for them had been absent. Arjuna understood Bhima's thoughts and slightly bent his face downwards. He addressed Bhima, "O Bhima, our royal father is advancing in years and has resolved to retire into the woods. He wishes to make gifts for advancing the happiness of his slain kinsmen and well-wishers now in the other world." Faudana explained that Dhritarashtra wanted to give away wealth that belonged to them by conquest, specifically for Bhishma and others who had been killed in battle. Bhima's anger boiled over as he remembered the humiliation they had suffered at the hands of their cousins. He refused to grant permission for Dhritarashtra to perform the Sraddha rituals, saying, "Let not our foes be gladdened. Let Duryodhana and others sink from a miserable to a more miserable position." Bhima's words were laced with pain and resentment as he recalled their years in exile, living incognito and supporting themselves on wild fruits. Faudana tried to calm Bhima down, reminding him that it was for the benefit of their relatives that Dhritarashtra wanted to perform the rituals. He explained that by granting permission, they would be doing a noble deed and bringing happiness to their ancestors. However, Bhima's anger had reached a boiling point, and he lashed out at Faudana, accusing him of forgetting their past suffering. Yudhishthira, who had been listening to the exchange between his brothers, intervened and rebuked Bhima for speaking out of turn. He told Bhima to be silent, as the decision was not up to them to make. The scene came to an end with Yudhishthira's stern words, but the emotions of the brothers still lingered in the air, a testament to the deep-seated wounds of their past experiences as the day wore on. The discussion would continue and the fate of Dhritarashtra. The sun beat down on the gathering of nobles as they sat in sullen silence, their faces etched with concern and respect. Arjuna, the great warrior, stood before his brother Bhima, his words dripping with sincerity. O Bhima, he began, you are my elder brother, and I dare not say anything more than what I have already said. His eyes locked onto Bhima's, filled with a deep affectionate. Arjuna spoke. The assembly held its collective breath. The royal sage Dhritarashtra, their king, deserved honor and respect in every way. Those who were good and noble remembered only the benefits they had received, not the wrongs done to them. This was the wisdom of the great Faudana, and his words hung in the air like a promise. King Yudhishthira, son of Kunti, rose from his seat, his eyes shining with a deep understanding. He addressed Vidura, their wise advisor, saying, instructed by me, O Kshatriya, do thus say unto the Kuru king that I shall give him as much wealth from my treasury as he wishes to give away, for the obsequies of his son and Bhishma and others among his well-wishers and benefactors. His voice was calm, yet carried a weight of compassion. The messenger's eyes flashed with danger as he cast glances at Arjuna. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, but Yudhishthira intervened, his words dripping with wisdom. It behoves not King Dhritarashtra to be angry with Bhimasna, he said. This great warrior was afflicted by cold and rain and heat and 1,000 other griefs. While residing in the woods, his voice brought a stillness to the gathering. Vidura's eyes met Yudhishthira's, understanding the depth of his words. He nodded, and with a gentle smile began to speak on behalf of their king. O foremost one of Bharata's race, he said, the king may take from my house whatever articles he wishes, in whatever measure also he likes. His voice was like a soothing balm calming the troubled waters. As Vidura spoke, Yudhishthira's words poured forth like a river. Let the king make gifts unto the Brahmanas, he said. Let him spend as largely as he likes. Let him free himself from the debt he owes to his sons and well-wishers. His voice was filled with generosity, yet tempered by wisdom. The assembly hung on Yudhishthira's words like a thirsty traveler at an oasis. They were words of peace, of compassion, of forgiveness. Let him be told, besides, Vidura continued, O monarchs, this very body of mine is at the disposal, and all the wealth I have. In the midst of a summer gathering, Vasampayana stood before King Yudhishthira and recounted the words of Vidura. The king's message had been one of grave import, delivered with urgency and conviction. Vasampayana's voice trembled as he spoke of the weighty words that had been shared between Vidura and Dhritarashtra. The wise and just ruler Vasampayana began and entrusted Vidura with a message for King Yudhishthira. The king, upon hearing Vidura's words, was deeply moved by their gravity and wisdom. He applauded them highly, his voice filled with sincerity. Vidura had indeed been the first to convey Dhritarashtra's message to the king. His words had sparked a chain of events that would change the course of his story. As Vasampayana continued to speak, the scene shifted to the gathering where Vidura stood before Dhritarashtra. Once more Vidura returned to Dhritarashtra. Vasampayana said and shared with him the words of King Yudhishthira and Arjuna. The king's message was one of peace and reconciliation, a call for forgiveness and understanding in the face of past hostilities. Dhritarashtra listened intently as Vidura spoke, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions. He had been given a chance to make amends, to put aside the animosity that had long divided him from his sons. The weight of this responsibility was crushing, yet he knew it was an opportunity too great to pass up. As Vasampayana's tale unfolded, the focus shifted to Bhima, the mighty armed warrior who had struggled with the decision to forgive his father. His heart heavy with sorrow and regret, Bhima had finally given his consent, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke of the pain that still lingered. The same then shifted to the gathering where King Yudhishthira, Arjuna, and Vidura stood before Dhritarashtra, their voices filled with persuasion. They begged him to pardon them as transgressions, to see beyond the shadows of the past and towards a brighter future. Forgive us, O king, they implored. We are but your humble servants, seeking only to bring peace and harmony to our kingdom. Dhritarashtra's heart swelled with emotion as he listened to their words. He knew that this was his chance to make amends, to put aside the animosity that had long divided him from his sons. With a heavy heart, he nodded in agreement, his voice barely above a whisper. So under the light of the full moon on the day of Kartik, Dhritarashtra set his mind towards making large presents to the Brahmanas his kingdom would be. The sun was setting over Hastinapura, Casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets, King Dhritarashtra, seated on his throne, listened intently as Vidura spoke of Yudhishthira's selfless act. The king's face lit up with pleasure, and he nodded in approval. Vidura, he said, "You have told me of my son's noble deed. I am pleased that the Pandavas are showing such kindness to our ancestors." He turned to his advisor, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Summon the Brahmanas and rishis from all over the kingdom. We must prepare for the Sraddha sacrifice, a ritual to honor Bhishma and our dear friends who have passed on." Vidura hastened to carry out the king's orders, while Dhritarashtra began making arrangements for the grand ceremony. He summoned his chiefs to prepare an abundance of food and drink and ordered that cars, clothes, and ornaments be brought forth from storage. The palace was soon filled with the sound of hammering on metal and the chatter of servants as they scurried about preparing for the festivities. As the day wore on, the king's generosity knew no bounds. He gave away his wealth in vast quantities, naming each gift as he bestowed it upon the worthy recipients: Drona, Ishma, Samadatta, Valaka, and even his own son, Duryodhana. All received gifts that would make their ancestors proud. Yudhishthira, who had been overseeing the preparations, nodded in approval at each gift. "Let it be so, father," he said, as the king directed the distribution of treasures. "May our ancestors be pleased with these offerings." And so the king's generosity flowed like a mighty river, nourishing all who received his gifts. As the days past, the Sraddha sacrifice continued to unfold, with the king and his guests feasting and merrymaking together. Actors and mimes danced and sang their performances, filling the air with music and laughter. And Dhritarashtra, the great king of Kuru's race, gave away his wealth without stint or reserve. For 10 days the kingdom was bathed in joy and abundance. The king's Dhritarashtra was seen as Vidura had called it, overflowed with gifts, its waters sparkling with jewels and gems, its islands verdant with villages and fields, its caves rich with precious articles. And when at last the ceremony came to an end, Dhritarashtra, exhausted but content, knew that he had fulfilled his duty to his ancestors. As he looked out upon the sea of faces before him, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had given generously, and in doing so had freed himself from the debts he owed to his sons and grandsons. The day of full moon in the month of Kartik had finally arrived, and with it King Dhritarashtra's decision to embark on his journey to the woods was set in motion. As he prepared for his departure, he summoned the Pandavas, those noble princes who were dear to him. The old monarch, accompanied by his wife Gandhari, approached them with a mix of sadness and determination etched on their face, as the many rites had been performed by learned Brahmanas, and now it was time for Dhritarashtra to bid farewell to the only home he had known for so long. He donned deerskins and barks, the symbol of his renunciation of worldly life, and set out with his daughters-in-law by his side. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion as the women of the royal household, including the Pandava and Kaurava ladies, let out a collective wail that echoed through the streets. As Dhritarashtra made his way out of the mansion, he paid homage to the place where he had lived for so long. He offered fried paddy and diverse flowers to the gods and honored his loyal servants with gifts of wealth. His departure was met with an outpouring of grief from all corners of Hastinapur. Women who had never ventured out before were seen rushing into the streets, their faces contorted and sorrowing. Yudhishthira, overcome by emotion, stumbled forward to ask his father where he was going, but his words were choked with tears, and he fell to the ground in a faint. Arjuna's eyes welled up with grief as he watched his brother succumb to despair. The other princes, including Dema, Nakula, and Sahadevat, stood by helplessly, their faces etched with distress. Vrikadura, the heroic Phaljana, tried to rouse Yudhishthira from his swoon, but even he couldn't hide the anguish in his voice. The women of the royal household, Kantai, Krishna, Ira, and Chitrangada, walked ahead, their footsteps slow and deliberate, as if trying to keep pace with the weight of their grief. Gandhari, her eyes bandaged, leaned on Kantai's shoulder, while Dhritarashtra followed behind, his hand on her shoulder, a testament to his devotionness. They made their way through the city. The wails of the women grew louder, a cacophony that echoed through the streets. Like the cries of a swarm of she-ospreys, the citizens of Hastinapur poured out into the streets, their faces etched with distress, as if reliving the pain of the Pandavas' departure all those years ago. In this sea of sorrow, one sight stood out: Kantai, her face set in determination, bearing the weight of Gandhara's bandaged eyes on her shoulders. She walked. The city of Hastinapur was in an uproar as the old King Dhritarashtra made his way through the crowded streets with joined hands and trembling weakness. He had decided to leave the city behind and retire into the forest accompanied by Vedur, Sanjaya, and a few others. The people of the city were reluctant to part ways with their beloved monarch, but they eventually dispersed as he repeatedly bade them to return home as Dhritarashtra's entourage made its way through the principal gate king, Yudhishthira, his brothers, and their wives prepared to follow him into the forest. However, Kunti, the king's mother, had other plans. She caught hold of Gandhari, her daughter-in-law, and continued on her own path, determined to retire into the woods with her mother. "Please don't go," Yudhishthira pleaded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'll follow the old king. You must stay behind with our wives and daughters." But Kunti remained resolute, her expression unyielding as she gazed at her son. "I'm not abandoning you, my children," she said, her voice firm, but tinged with sadness. "But I've made a mistake in the past, one that has haunted me ever since I should have spoken the truth about Karna's birth, and now he's gone. I want to atone for my sin by living in the woods, performing penances, and serving your father-in-law and mother-in-law." Yudhishthira was taken aback by his mother's words. He reflected on her past actions and the pain she had endured, but he couldn't bring himself to let her go. "Mother, you've always been our guiding light," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You instructed us in the ways of Kshatriya practices, and now you want to abandon them. How will you live in the woods away from our kingdom and our people?" But Kunti remained unmoved, her determination unwavering as she continued on her way. Bhima joined in pleading with his mother to reconsider, but she ignored their words of comfort. Draupadi and Suvedra followed closely behind, their faces etched with worry and concern. As the procession made its way through the forest, Kunti's son tried one last time to persuade her to stay. "Mother, we understand your desire for atonement," Yudhishthira said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but think of our kingdom, our people, and our wives who depend on us. Please don't leave us now." But Kunti's resolve remained unshaken, and she pressed on, her heart filled with a sense of duty and redemption. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest, the sun had just begun to set over the kingdom of Hastinapura, casting a warm orange glow over the anxious faces of the Pandavas. Kunti, their mother and queen, stood before them, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions as she recounted the events that had led up to their current situation. "My sons," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know that you are all feeling defeated and demoralized. Your kingdom has been taken from you, and you have fallen prey to the cunning schemes of your cousins, the Kaurava." She paused, surveying the room with a keen eye. "But I want you to remember how we used to be. We were once the rulers of this land, respected and revered by all who knew us." Kunti's eyes sparkled as she continued, her voice taking on a note of determination. "I was the one who instilled courage in your hearts, my sons. I reminded you of your strength and prowess, equal to that of the gods themselves. I urged you to stand up for yourselves, not just for your own sakes, but for the sake of our family's honor." And legacy turned her gaze specifically to Bhima, his massive frame towering over the others. "I wanted to prevent you from retreating into the forest, living a life of misery and shame. I knew that you were capable of so much more than that." Her voice dropped to a whisper as she spoke of Vijaya, the young prince who had been born after Bhima. "And for your sake, my dear son, I wanted to give him a chance to grow up in a world where he could be proud of his family and himself." And Tai's eyes moved on Danakula and Sahadeva, her youngest sons, their faces filled with concern as they listened to their mother. "I didn't want you two to suffer from hunger or weakness, my dear ones," she said softly. "You have always been devoted to your elders, and I wanted to ensure that you were taken care of." As she spoke, Kunti's gaze turned inward, her mind reliving the painful memory of Dasesana, dragging Draupadi through the public hall, her hair torn from her scalp as if she were a slave. "I was beside myself with grief and rage when I saw that happen," she confessed, her voice trembling once more. "But I knew that I had to act quickly for the sake of our family's honor and dignity." Kunti took a deep breath, composing herself before continuing. "So I called upon Vidula's words, those stirring phrases that had always inspired me in times of need. I recited them to you, my sons, hoping to instill courage into your hearts." Once more her eyes locked onto Yudhishthira, her eldest son and the rightful king of Hastinapura. In a somber mood, Vaisampayana recounted the tale of Kunti, the virtuous mother of the Pandavas. As she spoke, the sinless Pandavas felt a pang of shame, their faces flushing with embarrassment. They ceased to follow Kuntai along with the princess of Panchala and instead circled around King Dhritarashtra, paying him due homage. Kuntai's resolve to venture into the woods was unwavering, and her decision sparked an outpouring of lamentations from the ladies of the Pandava household. The Pandavas, their hearts heavy with sorrow, made one final attempt to persuade Kuntai to return to her royal life. But it was not to bed Dhritarashtra, his voice trembling with emotion, addressed Gandhara and Vidura, pleading with them to convince Kuntai to abandon her plan. Why should she leave behind the luxuries of our kingdom? He asked, his words laced with a deep sense of longing. She can practice penance and perform great deeds from within the comfort of our palace. Gandhara echoed Dhritarashtra's sentiments, repeating his words to Kuntai and adding her own poignant pleas. But Kuntai remained resolute, her heart fixed on her decision to retreat into the woods as the Pandavas and their wives reluctantly bid farewell to Kuntai. A collective wail of lamentation arose from the ladies of the Kuru clan. The city of Hastinapur fell silent, its inhabitants overcome with grief. No festivals or celebrations were held. Instead, the people mourned the loss of their beloved matriarch. The Pandavas, once full of energy and vitality, now trudged through the forest, their spirits crushed by Kuntai's departure like cows separated from their mothers. They wandered aimlessly, devoid of purpose. Yudhishthira, his wisdom guiding him forward, pressed on with determination. But even he was not immune to the sorrow that gripped them all as night began to fall. Dhritarashtra and his entourage arrived at a secluded spot near the Bhagirathi River. Brahmanas from nearby villages joined them, kindling sacred fires that illuminated the darkness. The king performed his evening rituals, pouring libations onto the flames as he worshipped the setting sun. The night wore on. The group settled in for rest. Vidura and Sanjaya preparing a bed of kusa grass for Dhritarashtra, while Gandhara lay nearby. Kuntai, her vows guiding her, found solace in the peaceful surroundings, her heart at ease despite the turmoil that had led her to this place. The night air was filled with the chanting of sacred hymns, the sacrificial fires burning brightly around them. In this moment of tranquility, the group found a fleeting sense of peace. Their sorrow, as the sun began to set on the banks of the sacred Bhagirathi River, King Dhritarashtra, accompanied by his wife Gandhara, made their way down to the water's edge. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the gentle chirping of birds as they descended into the cool, clear waters. The king and queen had come to this holy place seeking purification, and with each step they felt their hearts becoming lighter, their minds clear as they bathed in the sacred stream. The king's thoughts turned to his past deeds, and he felt a deep sense of regret for the mistakes he had made as a ruler. He thought about the wars he had fought, the lives lost, and the suffering he had caused. But with each stroke of water on his skin, he felt a weight lifting off his shoulders, and his heart began to fill with a newfound sense of purpose. After their ablutions, the king and queen emerged from the waters, their faces refreshed and renewed. They were greeted by the wise Vidura, who had been advising them on this path of spiritual growth. Together they performed the usual rites of religion, seeking to purify themselves further and connect with the divinity. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The king made his way to a sacrificial altar that had been set up for him. With reverence, he poured libations onto the fire, offering prayers and thanks to the gods. The air was filled with the sweet scent of incense as he performed this sacred ritual, and his heart felt at peace. The next morning, the king set out on a journey to Kurukshetra, accompanied by his followers and advisors. They traveled for many days, finally arriving at the retreat of the wise Satyapa, a great sage who had once been a king himself. Satyapa received Dhritarashtra with due respect and invited him to stay in his ashram. Under Satyapa's guidance, the king learned about the forest mode of life, a path of spiritual growth that emphasized renunciation, self-discipline, and devotion to the divine. The king was fascinated by this way of living, and he felt drawn to it with all his heart. He spent many days in meditation and contemplation, learning from Satyapa's wise words and practicing the vows of the forest Madhya. As the king delved deeper into this path, Queen Gandhara also began to follow suit. She donned a bark robe and deerskin cloak, just like her husband, and joined him in his spiritual practices. Together they renounced their royal trappings and immersed themselves in austerities, seeking to purify their souls and connect with the divine. This way, King Dhritarashtra, once a mighty ruler, began to transform into a great sage, a rishi who had reduced his body to skin and bones through intense spiritual practice. His mind was now free. In the midst of a dense forest, a gathering of revered ascetics had assembled to meet King Dhritarashtra. Among them were Narada and Parva, renowned for their austere penances, as well as Devala, Vesa, and Satyapa, each distinguished by their wisdom and spiritual accomplishments. Kunti, the king's wife, welcomed them with reverence, offering worship to these esteemed sages. As they settled in, the great rishis began to engage King Dhritarashtra in discussions on dharma and righteousness. Their words were like balm to his soul, lifting his spirits and filling him with a sense of purpose. Narada, with his piercing gaze that beheld all things as direct perceptions, spoke up, recounting tales of kings who had achieved great prosperity through their penances. She began by telling the story of Sahasrakatiya, the grandfather of Satyapa, who had renounced his kingdom to live in the woods through intense austerities. He had reached the realm of Purandara, where he resided with Indra. Himself, Narada shared similar tales of Sailaleya and Prishatra, both grandfathers of renowned kings who had ascended to the heavens through their penances. The assembly was captivated by Narada's words, as he spoke of Mandatri's son Puripatsa, who had achieved great success in this very forest. The mighty Narmada river had even become his consort. Another king, Saisalamon, had also undergone severe austerities here before ascending to the heavens. King Dhritarashtra listened intently, moved by Narada's words. He felt a surge of hope and determination, knowing that he too could achieve great things through his penances. Narada continued, saying that Panu, the slayer of Val, thought of him always and would assist him in attaining prosperity. As the assembly dispersed, Satyapa approached Narada with a question burning within him. He asked about the region King Dhritarashtra would attend after completing his penances. Narada smiled, revealing that he had witnessed the conversation between Sakra and Pandu regarding Dhritarashtra's future. According to Narada, there were still 3 years left of the king's allotted lifespan. After those years, Dhritarashtra, accompanied by Gandhara, would travel to the realm of Kura on a chariot moving at his will, adorned with celestial ornaments. He would be honored by the King of Kings and roam freely through the realms of the gods, deities, Gandharvas, and Rakshas. As the assembly erupted in joy upon hearing Narada's words, which were like nectar to their ears, King Dhritarashtra too was filled with cheer and gratitude, knowing that his future held promise and prosperity. As they departed, the gathering of sages, in the aftermath of the devastating war that had ravaged the land, the Pandavas were consumed by grief and sorrow. Their mother, Kunti, had chosen to retire to the forest with her husband, Dhritarashtra, leaving behind their sons who were struggling to come to terms with their new reality. As the news of the royal couple's departure spread, the citizens of Hastinapura were overcome with deep sadness. The Brahmins would often gather and lament the fate of the old king, wondering how he could possibly survive in the harsh wilderness without his comforts and luxuries. How will the king who has become old live in the solitary woods? They would ask. And what about Gandhara, the queen, and Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas? They are used to living in the lap of luxury. How will they adapt to this new life? As citizens' concerns were not unfounded, for Dhritarashtra was indeed an old man who had grown accustomed to the comforts of royal life. His blindness, a reminder of his own failures and mistakes, seemed like a heavy burden to bear. Kunti too had made a sacrificial choice by leaving behind her sons, and it was clear that she was struggling to cope with the weight of her decision. The Pandavas themselves were racked with sorrow as they thought about their mother's departure. They would often gather in their palace, trying to make sense of their new reality. What is now the condition of our royal father? They would ask each other, and how will he survive without his sight? Their own grief was compounded by the loss of their friends and comrades who had fallen in battle. Arjuna, ever the warrior, was particularly affected by the memory of Abhimanyu's sacrifice on the battlefield. The image of his young nephew, whose life had been cut short in a brutal manner, haunted him. Still, how could such a tragedy have occurred? He would ask himself, his mind replaying the events of that fateful day. The loss of Karna too weighed heavily on Arjuna's heart. The mighty warrior had fought valiantly for the Kauravas, but in the end it was not his strength or bravery that decided his fate. It was a painful reminder that even the greatest warriors can fall victim to circumstance. At Pandava's sorrow was further compounded by the loss of their other friends and comrades who had perished in the war. Draupada's children were gone. Savedra was childless, and the land itself seemed barren and devoid of heroes. It was as if the very fabric of society had been torn apart. As they struggled to come to terms with their new reality, the Pandavas found solace in the thought of their future. Their grandsires who had somehow managed to survive the war held on to life, and the Pandavas, those brave sons of king, and who were consumed by grief. Their usually vibrant city was now a dull reflection of their sorrow. The princes who had once been engaged in kingly duties now wandered aimlessly, their minds preoccupied with thoughts of their mother. As they walked, they couldn't help but think about the fate of their emaciated mother, Kuntai, who was serving the old couple Dhritarashtra and Gandhara in the woods. How is our mother living? They would ask each other, their anxiety palpable. They wondered how she managed to survive with no one to care for her, surrounded by beasts of prey. Their concern for their mother's well-being was matched only by their worry about Dhritarashtra, who had lost his sons and was now living alone in the woods with Gandhari. How is he faring? They would speculate. Is he still strong enough to lead? Their questions hung in the air like unspoken prayers. Ahead of one of the Pandavas finally broke the silence. He approached Yudhishthira and spoke about their journey to the woods. I have been thinking about our mother, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. She was once a princess, living in palaces and mansions. But now she's living in misery, her hair matted with dust, sleeping on blades of grass. Yudhishthira listened intently to Sahadev's words, his heart heavy with sorrow. He knew that their mother's situation was dire, and he couldn't bear the thought of not seeing her again. Let us go, he said, finally, his voice firm, but laced with emotion. Queen Draupadi, Yudhishthira's wife, echoed Sahadeva's sentiments. She too longed to see their mother who had given them life and love. When will we get to see our queen? She asked, her eyes brimming with tears. If only I can behold her once more, my life will be complete. Yudhishthira's words were like a balm to the Pandavas' sorrow. He summoned their army, and soon the city was abuzz with activity. Conveyances were readied, litters prepared, and treasuries ordered out. Cooks and superintendents of kitchens scurried about, preparing food for the long journey ahead. As the sun rose on a new day, the king set out with his large train of women and old men. He waited 5 days in the city, allowing any citizens who wished to see him to join the procession. Finally, after much preparation, they set off towards the forest, their hearts filled with hope and longing. As they walked, Yudhishthira's thoughts were consumed by his mother, Kuntai. He wondered. As the sun rose over the vast expanse of the kingdom, Vaisampayana stood before King Dhritarashtra, his voice booming through the air. Your Majesty, he said, it is time for your troops to march out and join you on the great journey ahead. The king's eyes sparkled with excitement as he gave the order to his generals. Instantly, a cacophony of sounds erupted from the camp. Horsemen shouted, equip, equip, as they readied their steeds for battle. Others mounted carriages and vehicles adorned with gold and precious gems, their horses' hooves pounding against the earth. Some rode on mighty elephants, their trunks held high in triumph, while others climbed onto camels, their long necks bobbing up and down. The citizens of the kingdom, eager to catch a glimpse of their beloved king, followed behind in a variety of conveyances. Some sat in ornate palanquins, surrounded by lavish curtains and silken drapes. Others rode on foot, their feet pounding against the earth as they kept pace with the retreating army. Kripa, the wise preceptor, led the forces at the command of King Dhritarashtra. His eyes shone with a deep understanding of the ancient traditions that guided them as he marched towards the old king's retreat. His thoughts turned to the great leader who would one day take up the mantle of leadership. Meanwhile, Yudhishthira, the eldest son of Pandu, prepared for his own journey. He was surrounded by a retinue of Brahmanas, their sacred mantras and prayers filling the air as they accompanied him on his way. A band of Sudhas and Megadha sang his praises, their voices rising in sweet harmony above them all. A white umbrella held aloft, symbolizing the king's divine right to rule of Regadura. The fierce warrior with the strength of the wind god rode at the forefront of the army. His elephant, as massive as a hill, towered above the others, its tusks gleaming in the sunlight. Arjuna, the mighty archer, followed close behind, his senses calm and focused as he guided his chariot through the crowded ranks. The ladies of the royal household, led by the beautiful Draupadi, rode in closed litters, their faces veiled from prying eyes. As they passed, they scattered wealth and jewels, their generosity a testament to the king's prosperity. The air was filled with the sound of trumpets and the sweet music of Venus. As the Pandava host made its way towards Kurukshetra, the army approached the sacred river Yamuna. King Yudhishthira gazed out at the retreat of his father Dhritarashtra. His heart swelled with joy as he beheld the royal sage's dwelling place with a fire burst. As Vaisampayana began to recount the tale, he spoke of a poignant moment in time, The Pandavas, those revered princes, had arrived at the sacred retreat of Dhritarashtra. Their uncle and king they alighted from their chariots. Their bodies bent in humility as they made their way on foot towards the royal about the entire retinue of combatants, along with the denizens of the kingdom, and the spouses of the Kuru chiefs followed closely behind them. The air was alive with anticipation, for it had been a long time since these beloved princes had set eyes on each other as they approached the retreat. They were met by an abundance of deer and plantain trees, their beauty a testament to the tranquility that surrounded Dhritarashtra's home. Many ascetics, bound by rigid vows, had gathered at the retreat in curiosity, eager to catch a glimpse of the Pandavas who had finally arrived. Their arrival was met with great fanfare, as if the very heavens themselves were rejoicing. King Dhritarashtra, overcome with emotion, approached them, his eyes brimming with tears. For has my eldest sire, the perpetrator of Kuru's race, gone? He asked, his voice trembling with longing. The Pandavas replied that their father had stepped out to perform his ablutions in the Yamuna river, as well as to gather flowers and water for a ritual offering. With this information, Dhritarashtra set off quickly towards the river, his heart filled with hope. As he walked, he caught sight of Pritha, his beloved wife, standing by the river's edge. Her eyes lit up with joy upon seeing her sons approaching, and she hastened to meet him. Sahadeva, ever the first to arrive at any gathering, ran towards his mother with a speed that belied his gentle nature. Tears streaming down her cheeks, Pritha welcomed her son back into her arms, embracing him warmly. She then informed Gandhari of Sahadeva's arrival, and together they hastened to greet the rest of their family. As they walked, Pritha was at the forefront, leading the childless old couple by the hand. As the Pandavas caught sight of their mother approaching, they fell to the ground in a gesture of respect and devotion. Dhritarashtra, recognizing them by their voices and touch, comforted them one by one, his eyes overflowing with tears. The reunion was nothing short of magical, as if time itself had been suspended, and they had regained their composure. The Pandavas approached their mother, who was still holding Sahadeva close to her heart. They took from her hands the jars filled with water that she and Gandhari had been carrying, offering them back to their father in a gesture of respect. The ladies of the royal household, along with the inhabitants of the city and provinces, in the tranquil retreat of his eldest sire Dhritarashtra, the aged king of Kuru's race, sat surrounded by the revered ascetics from diverse regions. These sages had gathered to behold the sons of that illustrious lord. The Pandavas, of wide chests, renowned for their valor and wisdom. The Sudha, Sanjaya, a learned man well versed in the lore of old, stood before them, eager to point out the Pandavas. And Draupadi, the princess of great fame, he began his narration. Sanjaya's eyes wandered to the Kuru king Dhritarashtra. This one, he said, with a complexion as fair as pure gold, possesses a body that resembles that of a full-grown lion. His aquiline nose and wide, expansive eyes like copper hue make him unmistakable. Next to him sat Brikadura, whose tread resembled an infuriated elephant's, with a complexion as fair as heated gold and arms long and stout. Sanjaya continued his description, pointing out Arjuna, the mighty bowman, who sat beside Dhritarashtra. This one, he said, with a darkish complexion and youthful frame, resembles the leader of an elephantine herd. His shoulders are as high as those of a lion, and his eyes are as expansive as lotus petals. The twins, resembling Vishu and Mahendra, sat beside Kunti. Their mother Sanjaya described them as having no equals in beauty, strength, or excellence of conduct. As he spoke, Sanjaya's gaze fell upon the ladies who accompanied the Pandavas. There was Krisha, the embodied form of the goddess of prosperity, with eyes as expansive as lotus petals and a complexion like that of the blue lotus. Next to her sat Draupadi, the princess of great fame, whose beauty shone like the rays of the moon. The ascetics were amazed by Sanjaya's vivid descriptions, and they asked him to point out the other ladies who accompanied the Pandava. Sanjaya obliged, describing each one with precision, from Chitrangada, the princess of Magadha, to the daughters of Madravata and Virata. He also mentioned the widows of Dhritarashtra's slain sons, their hair unparted and clad in white. With the ascetics gone, Dhritarashtra turned his attention to the Pandavas, inquiring about their welfare. O Yudhishthira, he said, art thou in peace and happiness? Do they, brothers, and the inhabitants of the city and provinces prosper under thee? He asked about the well-being of his own family, including Vidura, who was performing austere penances in the distant forest. As Dhritarashtra spoke, Vidura suddenly appeared at a distance. His body was emaciated. The night had fallen over the retreat of righteous ascetics, and the stars shone brightly in the sky. The air was filled with the sweet scent of incense and the soft murmur of Vedic hymns, the Pandavas led by Yudhishthira lay down on the bare ground near their mother Kunti after a meal of simple but nourishing food provided by King Dhritarashtra. They slept. The night wore on filled with the gentle sounds of peacocks and warblers singing in the forest. The next morning Yudhishthira rose early accompanied by his brothers to survey their surroundings. They roamed through the retreat taking in the sights and sounds of the bustling community. Everywhere they looked there were sacrificial altars ablaze with sacred fires surrounded by ascetics who had performed their oblations and poured libations to the deities. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of flowers and fruits gathered from the forest and piled high on the altars. Herds of deer grazed freely unafraid, and birds sang sweet melodies from the trees above. The Pandavas walked among these peaceful